80 years of silence had made humanity soft, or so the Dominion believed. David Ross hauled cargo between the outer colonies, just like he did every week. His ship was old and slow, carrying food and medicine to settlements that needed supplies. The work was boring but honest. Nobody shot at him anymore. Nobody tried to kill him. That life had ended long ago in another century, when he wore a different uniform and carried weapons instead of wheat. He barely remembered those days now. The war, the screaming, the blood on his hands. The Concordat had promised all of that was finished forever. Humanity had put down their guns and chosen peace, real peace. They destroyed every warship, melted every weapon, and sent soldiers like David into a deep sleep until the galaxy needed freight haulers instead of killers. When he woke up 20 years ago, the world was different, better, clean. Nobody talked about battles anymore. Children grew up never knowing what a battlefield looked like.
David was happy about that.
He wanted to forget too. Helen Wright spent her days studying alien plants on Anchor Point Research Station. She loved her work. Every species they discovered taught them something new about life in the universe. The Dominion had made contact 3 months ago, and Helen was excited. Finally, humanity would meet other civilizations. They could share knowledge, culture, and friendship. She believed the galaxy was ready for peace just like Earth. Patricia Stone managed supply routes for the colonial administration. She was old now, with gray hair and tired eyes. Once she commanded fleets. Thousands of people followed her orders into battle. But that was before the Concordat. Before humanity decided war was a sickness they needed to cure. Patricia agreed with that choice. She had seen too much death. If humanity could survive without violence, she would support it until her last breath. James Webb represented Earth in the Concordat Peace Council. He built his entire career on the promise that humanity would never fight again. Diplomacy solved every problem. Communication prevented every conflict. When the Dominion arrived, James saw opportunity. This was humanity's chance to prove that peace was stronger than weapons. He prepared speeches and gifts. He organized meetings and cultural exchanges. The Dominion seemed curious but distant. James told himself that was normal. First contact always started slowly. Then the Dominion made their demand. Submit to their empire. Become vassals. Surrender independence. 30 days to decide. James tried to explain that humanity valued freedom. They could be allies instead, equals sharing the galaxy. The Dominion representative listened politely, then repeated the demand. Submit or face consequences. The Concordat Council debated for weeks. Some believed the Dominion was bluffing. Others suggested accepting vassal status temporarily, while working toward independence later. James pushed for continued negotiation. He was certain they could find common ground. War was not an option. Humanity had no military. They had no weapons. They had nothing but words and hope. The Dominion appeared in 12 human systems simultaneously. Their ships were massive, dark, and covered in weapons that humanity had forgotten how to build. They surrounded colonies and stations, waiting silently in space like hungry predators. Helen was working in her lab when the alarm sounded. She looked out the window and saw them. 20 Dominion warships forming a blockade around Anchor Point. Her hands shook. The station had no defenses, just scientists and families. The Dominion sent a message. This was a demonstration. Understand that resistance is impossible. Helen and her colleagues tried to evacuate, but the Dominion fired first. Their weapons cut through the station like paper. Sections exploded. Air vented into space. People screamed and died in seconds. Helen survived because she was near an escape pod. She watched the station break apart as she drifted away. 4,000 people lived on Anchor Point. Now they were debris floating in the darkness. The Concordat Council received reports from all 12 systems. The same pattern everywhere. Dominion ships appeared, sent warnings, destroyed something to prove their power. Thousands dead, and humanity could do nothing but count the bodies. James Webb stared at the casualty numbers and felt something break inside him. All his words, all his diplomacy, all his belief in peaceful resolution, none of it mattered. The Dominion did not care about speeches. They understood only strength, and humanity had none. David Ross heard the news in his cargo bay. He sat down slowly, feeling memories rise up from where he buried them. The old instincts, the combat reflexes, the cold calculation of tactical situations. He had spent 20 years pretending he was just a simple freight hauler. But deep down, under the peace and quiet, the soldier still lived. Patricia Stone received a coded message on her personal terminal. She had not seen that encryption in 80 years. Her fingers remembered the unlock sequence. The message was short. Project Ember remained secure, awaiting authorization. She closed her eyes. They had hoped this day would never come. When humanity disarmed, a small group of military leaders made a terrible choice. They could not destroy everything, could not leave humanity completely defenseless. So they hid the truth, buried it deep where the Concordat would never find it. Patricia had carried that secret for 8 decades, hoping she would die before it became necessary. She opened her eyes and began typing authorization codes. The Dominion had made their choice. Now humanity would remember what they used to be, what they could still become if pushed far enough. The sleeping war machines were about to wake up, and the galaxy would learn that peaceful people were not the same as helpless people. 80 years of silence ended with a single encrypted transmission sent to hidden facilities across 30 star systems. Deep in forgotten moons and hollowed asteroids, machines began to hum. Lights flickered on in chambers that had been dark for generations. And 300,000 soldiers started dreaming of home before they opened their eyes to a war they never wanted to fight. Cold bit into David's lungs as consciousness returned. His first breath burned. His second came easier. By the third, he remembered how to breathe without thinking about it. The cryopod hissed open and weak light flooded his vision. Everything hurt in that distant way that meant his body was still waking up faster than his nerves could process. Hands pulled him out. Someone wrapped a thermal blanket around his shoulders. A voice spoke, but the words came through like underwater echoes. David blinked until his eyes focused. A young woman in a medical uniform was checking his vitals. Behind her, rows of cryopods stretched into the darkness. Some were opening. Others remained sealed and frosted. The doctor gave him something warm to drink. His throat was raw. He sipped slowly and felt heat spread through his chest. His mind cleared and memory returned in pieces. The war, the peace, going into cryo-sleep. They told him it might be 5 years, maybe 10 if things went wrong. He would wake up to a galaxy that needed his skills for something other than killing. David looked at the doctor and managed to speak. "How long?" 80 years, she said quietly. "I'm sorry. We hope to never wake you at all." The room tilted, not because of the cryo, because 8 decades had passed while he slept. Everyone he knew was old or dead. The world had moved on without him. And they brought him back anyway, which meant something terrible had happened. More pods opened. Men and women stumbled out confused and shaking. David recognized some faces. They looked exactly the same as the day they went to sleep. Young and strong and trained for violence. Around them, civilians worked quickly to help. Medical staff, technicians, administrators, all of them moving with practiced efficiency. Patricia Stone walked between the pods. David had served under her command during the Frontier Wars. She was a captain back then, young and fierce. Now her hair was silver and her face carried lines that only time could carve. But her eyes were the same, hard and sharp and focused. She saw David and nodded. "Glad you're awake, Ross. We need everyone." Over the next hours, they explained everything. The Concordat. The 80 years of peace. Humanity spreading across the stars without weapons. The Dominion and their ultimatum. The destroyed research station. David listened and felt his old training reassert itself. Threat assessment. Resource evaluation. Strategic options. His mind had not forgotten how to think like a soldier even if his body had been frozen. "How many did you wake?" David asked. 300,000 across all facilities, Patricia said. Pilots, Marines, engineers, strategists. Everything we hid away when the Concordat demanded complete disarmament. And the ships? Weapons? Hidden in asteroid fields and dead moons. Automated maintenance kept everything functional. The technology is 80 years old now, but it still works. David looked around at the other veterans climbing out of their pods. They were fragments of a past humanity had tried to erase. Ghost soldiers from a war that ended before most living people were born. "Does the Concordat know?" "They do now," Patricia said. Half the council wanted to keep negotiating. The other half voted to activate Project Ember. We have 18 days until the Dominion's deadline. The next week blurred together. Veterans went through medical checks and retraining. Their bodies remembered combat reflexes that their minds had to relearn. David found himself in a simulator running tactical scenarios. The controls felt right in his hands. Muscle memory returned faster than conscious thought. Helen Wright briefed them on Dominion biology and technology. She had survived the station attack, and her voice shook when she described watching her colleagues die. The Dominion were 3 allied species, each specialized for different combat roles. Their ships were powerful, but built around formal engagement doctrine. They expected honor in warfare. David studied the tactical data and saw weaknesses. The Dominion fought like civilizations that had never truly struggled. Their battles were ritual as much as conflict. They had rules. Humanity had learned long ago that rules only mattered if both sides followed them. James Webb visited the awakened veterans. He looked broken, his faith in diplomacy shattered by 4,000 corpses. He apologized to them, said he failed to keep the peace. David told him there was nothing to apologize for. Peace was always the right choice until someone made war inevitable. "What will you do?" James asked. "What we were trained to do," David said. "We'll end this quickly so humanity can go back to peace." "Will they surrender after one battle?" David shook his head. "They'll surrender after they understand what human warfare actually means." The Dominion Intelligence Network detected activity in human space. Ships emerging from hidden locations, facilities coming online, military personnel appearing from nowhere. Their analyst reported this to command with recommendations to accelerate the invasion timeline. The Dominion Admiral, Ralseth, reviewed the reports and laughed. Humans scrambling to rebuild a military in 2 weeks, using ancient technology, pathetic desperation. He decided to let them prepare. Better to crush them when they felt hope than when they felt helpless. David gathered with other senior officers in a converted asteroid facility. Patricia had overall command but wanted tactical input. They looked at star maps showing Dominion positions across 12 occupied systems. Conventional strategy said to consolidate forces and strike at their weakest point, establish a defensive line, protect critical systems. David suggested something different. "We don't have enough ships to fight them directly. But we don't need to fight their ships. We need to fight their will." He explained his plan. Strike everywhere simultaneously. Hit supply lines, communication networks, isolated patrol groups. Avoid direct engagement. Make them afraid to spread out. Force them to cluster defensively. Then use that clustering against them. "It's not honorable warfare," another officer said. "No," David agreed, "but it's effective warfare. And we're not trying to win honor. We're trying to win survival." Patricia approved the plan. Orders went out to all awakened personnel. Stealth teams prepared for insertion. Ships loaded with weapons that the Dominion had never seen before. Not because they were advanced, but because they were deliberately cruel. Humanity had spent centuries perfecting the art of making war so terrible that enemies would surrender rather than continue. On the 16th day, 3 days before the Dominion deadline, human forces struck. They did not announce themselves, did not demand surrender, did not give warnings. They simply appeared and started destroying everything that kept the Dominion fleet operational. Supply freighters exploded in parking orbits. Communication satellites went dark. Officers died in their quarters from bombs that should not have been possible to smuggle aboard. The Dominion reeled, confused and angry. This was not warfare. This was terrorism. David commanded a small strike force that infiltrated a Dominion supply depot. They planted nuclear charges throughout the facility and evacuated before detonation. The explosion vaporized enough ammunition to supply 50 warships. In the flash, David felt nothing. Not pride. Not shame. Just cold calculation of reduced enemy capability. Across 12 systems, the pattern repeated. Humans struck from shadows and vanished before response forces arrived. The Dominion tried to adapt, but their doctrine had no answer for enemies who refused to fight fair. By the deadline day, 8 systems were liberated and Dominion forces were retreating toward their main armada. Ralseth raged at his subordinates. How could primitives with ancient technology cause such damage? The answer was simple but unacceptable. The Dominion had rules about warfare. Humanity had abandoned rules 80 years ago and were now remembering why rules existed. To make war survivable. To make battles winnable without destroying everything. David read the intelligence reports showing Dominion moral cracking. Good. Fear was a weapon sharper than any blade. But he also read reports of the main Dominion armada mobilizing. 2,000 warships heading toward human space. Humanity had freed 8 systems, but now faced an enemy strong enough to burn Earth to ash. Patricia called another command meeting. They had won the opening moves, but the real battle was coming. David looked at the tactical display and started planning. The Dominion wanted a decisive engagement. Humanity would give them one, just not the kind they expected. Numbers did not lie. 2,000 Dominion warships against 240 human vessels. Every tactical simulation showed the same result. Humanity lost, not just the battle, but everything. Earth, the colonies, their entire civilization erased in a few bloody hours. David ran the simulations again anyway. Different variables, different approaches, same outcome. The Dominion had overwhelming force and they knew how to use it. Their ships were newer, faster, better armed. In a direct fight, humanity would be slaughtered. So David stopped planning for a direct fight. His grandmother used to tell stories about the old wars. Back when humans only fought each other and every conflict taught brutal lessons, she said the best generals never fought on the enemy's terms. They changed the game completely, made the enemy react instead of act, turned strength into weakness. David pulled up historical files from before the Concordat. Battles humanity had won against impossible odds, not through honor or courage, but through ruthless creativity. He read about submarines and global wars, guerrilla fighters in jungles, terrorist cells that toppled empires. Every example showed the same truth. When you cannot match your enemy's strength, you destroy their ability to use that strength. He wrote a new tactical plan and sent it to Patricia. She read it in silence for 10 minutes. Then she looked at him with an expression he could not interpret. Respect maybe, or horror. Possibly both. This will work, she said finally. But the cost. We're already paying costs, David said. Thousands dead on anchor point. More dying in occupied systems. This ends it faster. It's monstrous. Yes. David did not argue. What he proposed was monstrous. But so was watching your civilization burn because you refused to be monstrous first. The Dominion started this war. We're going to finish it in a way that makes sure nobody ever starts another one. Patricia approved the plan. Orders went out immediately. 3 outer colonies received evacuation commands. Every civilian had 48 hours to leave. No exceptions, no delays. Ships of all sizes ferried people away while the Dominion Armada approached. The colonies were stripped of everything alive. Dominion scouts detected the mass evacuation and reported back. The humans were running, gathering at their homeworld for a final desperate defense. Ralseth smiled when he heard this. Finally, they would have the decisive battle. He split his armada, sending 1,200 ships to intercept the refugee fleet before it reached Earth. The rest would follow to ensure complete victory. What the Dominion scouts did not detect were the charges being placed throughout the evacuated colonies, or the fact that the refugee fleet consisted entirely of automated cargo ships, or the 300 small human warships hiding in the asteroid fields along the approach route. David watched from the command deck of the Perseverance as the Dominion fleet took the bait. 1,200 warships pursuing automated freighters that broadcast distress signals and civilian chatter recorded months ago. The Dominion formation was tight and confident. They expected minimal resistance. The freighters led them into a dense asteroid field. Standard evasion tactics. The Dominion fleet slowed to navigate safely. Still no human warships appeared. Ralseth ordered his ships to surround the refugee fleet. Cut off escape. Demand surrender before destroying them. Dominion vessels closed in from all directions. The freighters were trapped. Ralseth sent one final demand. Surrender or die. The freighters responded with their transponders. Not civilian codes, military ones, all reading the same designation. Autonomous munition platform. Ralseth had 3 seconds to understand before 200 automated freighters detonated simultaneously. Each carried enough nuclear warheads to vaporize a small moon. The combined explosion created a miniature star in the asteroid field. Electromagnetic pulse knocked out every ship within 50 kilometers. The radiation cloud scrambled sensors across 10 times that distance. 800 Dominion warships died in the blast. 400 more lost power or life support. They drifted helplessly while emergency systems struggled to restart. And then the human warships emerged from hiding. David's ship led the attack. They moved through the radiation cloud using instruments that the Dominion could not track. Every human vessel carried boarding teams. They attached to disabled Dominion ships like parasites. Cut through hulls, flooded compartments with gas, Seize control before the crew could mount organized resistance. It was butchery. David knew that. But it was efficient butchery. Within an hour, 200 Dominion vessels were under human control. The crews were sedated and locked in their own brigs. Human technicians worked frantically to learn the control systems. These ships were prizes, newer and more powerful than anything humanity possessed. The captured vessels turned their weapons on the Dominion ships that were still recovering. Ralseth watched in horror as his own fleet fired on itself. He tried to restore command and control, but the humans had already seized communication networks. Every order he sent was intercepted and blocked. David broadcast a message across all channels. Not to Ralseth. To every Dominion crew member who could hear. We did not want this war. You forced it upon us. Now you see what human warfare looks like. It is not honorable. It is not fair. It is designed to end conflict as quickly and completely as possible. Surrender now and you live. Continue fighting and we will do to your homeworlds what we just did to your fleet. Attached to the message were historical files. Footage from Earth's old wars. Nuclear weapons erasing cities. Biological plagues spreading through populations. Chemical attacks that melted soldiers in their trenches. Humanity's greatest shame archived and preserved as a warning. This is what we stopped ourselves from doing. This is what we became capable of. Do not make us remember completely. Over the next 6 hours, 90 Dominion ships surrendered. Their captains chose survival over certain death. The rest tried to fight and were destroyed by their own captured vessels. David felt sick watching it. This was victory, but it tasted like poison. Helen worked from a captured Dominion ship, analyzing their technology and culture. She found something important in their databases. The Dominion had never lost a war. Never even considered the possibility. Their entire society was built on the assumption that they were the strongest force in the galaxy. This defeat would shatter their worldview. She suggested broadcasting terms, not just military surrender but cultural exchange. Show the Dominion that humanity wanted peace. Give them a way to accept defeat without losing face. David agreed. Anything to end this faster. The terms went out with the historical files. Humanity offered to stop fighting immediately if the Dominion withdrew from all occupied systems. No reparations. No territory seized. Just mutual recognition and peaceful coexistence. The message emphasized that humanity remembered how to destroy civilizations but chose not to. Peace was strength. Restraint was victory. Ralseth received the message in his command ship. He was down to 600 vessels and facing an enemy that fought without honor. His subordinates urged him to accept terms. They had lost. Continuing would only increase casualties, but Ralseth refused to accept defeat from primitives who fought like cowards. He ordered his remaining ships toward Earth. If he could destroy the human homeworld, the rest would collapse. The Dominion would remember him as the admiral who won through determination. He burned his engines at maximum acceleration and ignored all further human communications. David watched the Dominion remnant fleet heading for Earth and knew diplomacy had failed. Some people only understood force. Ralseth would not stop until he was stopped permanently. David sent word to Patricia. Earth needed to prepare for siege. Every available ship should fall back to Sol system for final defense. But David also sent another message. To the Dominion ships that had surrendered, their crews were treated well. Given food and medical care, some were even released to return home with the peace terms. David told them to spread the word. Tell your people what happened here. Tell them humanity does not want to be your enemy, but also tell them what happens to those who refuse peace. One young Dominion officer asked David why humans fought so viciously if they claimed to want peace. David thought about it and gave the only honest answer he could. Because we remember what happens when peaceful people have no teeth. Predators eat them, so we keep our teeth sharp but choose not to bite, until someone makes biting necessary. The officer did not understand. His people had always been predators. They had never needed to learn restraint. David hoped they would learn before Ralseth forced humanity to teach them the hardest way possible. As the Perseverance turned toward Earth, David looked at casualty reports. Thousands of Dominion dead, hundreds of humans, and the war was not finished yet. Ralseth was coming with 600 ships full of rage and pride. Earth had 40 aging warships for defense. David ran the simulations and saw the same outcome as before. Humanity lost, unless they changed the game one more time. Earth looked beautiful from orbit, blue and green and white, swirled together in patterns that seemed almost intentional. Patricia watched her homeworld from the Lunar Command Center and wondered if this was the last time she would see it whole. Ralseth was coming with 600 warships. Earth had 40 ships and whatever tricks they could improvise in 72 hours. The evacuations had started immediately. Shuttles carried children and elderly to underground shelters. Billions of people trying to hide from weapons that could crack continents. Patricia knew the shelters would not save them if the Dominion got through, but people needed to feel like they were doing something. Hope mattered even when it was false. James Webb coordinated the civilian response. He looked 10 years older than he had a month ago. The weight of failed diplomacy had broken something inside him. Now he worked 18-hour days organizing evacuation routes and supply distribution. Patricia thought he was trying to save everyone personally, to make up for not preventing the war. Helen stayed in orbit despite orders to evacuate. She said her skills were needed analyzing Dominion tactics. Patricia suspected she could not bear to hide while others fought. Some people ran toward danger. Helen was one of them. The 40 defending ships formed a sphere around Earth, ancient vessels that had been built for different wars against different enemies. Their crews were a mix of awakened veterans and volunteers who had never fired a weapon before. Patricia gave them one order: delay as long as possible. The main fleet was 6 days away at maximum burn. Every hour of resistance brought reinforcements closer. David pushed his ship and crew beyond safe limits. They ran the engines so hot that coolant systems struggled to keep up. 3 vessels had already suffered mechanical failures and dropped out of formation. The rest kept burning toward Earth despite the risk. David told his crew they could rest when they were dead. Until then, Earth needed them. Ralseth entered the Sol system with confidence restored. Yes, the humans had destroyed half his armada through treachery and cowardice. But now they would face him in honest battle, ship against ship. The way war was meant to be fought. He would crush their pathetic defense and teach the galaxy what happened to primitives who defied the Dominion. His fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the outer edge of the system. Sensors immediately detected the human defense sphere. 40 contacts. Laughable. Ralseth ordered his ships into attack formation and began the approach to Earth. He moved slowly, methodically. Let the humans see his overwhelming force. Let them understand their defeat before it arrived. Patricia watched the Dominion fleet approach and activated the first defensive layer. Automated weapon platforms hidden throughout the asteroid belt for 80 years. They were simple, missiles with basic targeting computers. But there were thousands of them. They launched simultaneously, creating a wall of metal and explosives between the Dominion and Earth. Ralseth's ships destroyed most of the missiles easily. Their point defense systems were designed for exactly this threat. But a few hundred got through. They impacted shields and hulls. Some Dominion vessels took damage. 2 were destroyed. It was not much, but it proved Earth still had teeth. The Dominion fleet continued forward. Patricia activated the second defensive layer, magnetic accelerators built into Luna's surface. They fired projectiles at a fraction of light speed, chunks of iron and tungsten moving so fast they glowed white-hot. The Dominion detected them too late. 20 ships were struck before they could evade. 10 lost propulsion. 7 were destroyed completely. Ralseth realized the humans had turned the entire system into a weapon. Every moon and asteroid could hide surprises. He ordered his fleet to spread out and advance cautiously. This slowed his approach, but reduced casualties. Patricia smiled when she saw the formation change. Good. Every minute of delay brought David closer. The Dominion reached Jupiter after 18 hours of careful advancement. Sensors detected thousands of small objects in orbit around the gas giant. Ralseth sent scout ships to investigate. They found automated drones, simple machines with minimal engines and maximum explosives. The drones activated when the scouts approached and burned toward the main fleet. The Dominion destroyed them by the hundreds, but there were tens of thousands. They swarmed like insects, individually harmless, collectively devastating. 50 Dominion ships were damaged badly enough to require withdrawal. Ralseth pressed forward with the rest. 530 vessels. Still more than enough to overwhelm Earth's defense. Patricia watched the Dominion fleet grind through each defensive layer. They were learning, adapting, getting smarter with every engagement. The next layer would hurt them, but not stop them. And Earth was running out of layers. Helen analyzed the Dominion tactical adjustments and found a pattern. They concentrated firepower on threats but ignored everything else. Like predators focused on prey. She suggested a new approach. Make them see threats everywhere. Overload their decision-making. Patricia approved and uploaded new commands to the remaining defensive systems. When the Dominion reached Saturn, they found something different. The rings were full of old satellites and debris. Most of it looked inactive. Dead technology from Earth's early space age. Ralseth ignored it and pushed through. Then the debris activated, not as weapons, as noise. Every piece broadcasting signals and sensor ghosts. The Dominion computers could not differentiate real threats from false ones. In the confusion, real weapons struck. Missiles hidden among the debris. Kinetic kill vehicles disguised as ancient satellites. The Dominion lost 30 more ships before they cleared the ring system. Ralseth was learning to hate human creativity. Every defense was a trick. Every obstacle was a trap. David's fleet crossed into the Sol system with damaged ships and exhausted crews. They had burned for 6 days straight. 2 more vessels dropped out with engine failures in the final approach. David had 238 ships left, against 500 Dominion warships. Still impossible odds, but better than 40 against 600. He broadcast to Patricia. "We're here. Where do you need us?" "Everywhere," she replied. "They're 12 hours from Earth orbit. We've bloodied them, but they're still coming." David studied the tactical display. The Dominion fleet was battered but determined. Ralseth wanted Earth destroyed and would accept any cost to achieve it. This would not be won through clever traps. This required direct combat. The kind of brutal, grinding battle that David had hoped to avoid. He divided his forces. 100 ships would engage the Dominion fleet directly. Draw their attention and force them into combat. The other 138 would scatter and strike from multiple angles. Standard pack tactics. Divide the enemy's focus. Make them defend everywhere simultaneously. The final battle began at the orbit of Mars. Human ships accelerated at speeds that should have torn them apart. They crashed into the Dominion formation like hammers. No elegant maneuvers, no tactical sophistication, just raw aggression and desperation. David's ship took hits immediately. Shields collapsed, hull plates melted, but they kept firing until their weapons overheated. Around them, ships burned on both sides. The Dominion had superior firepower, but humans fought with suicidal intensity. They rammed disabled vessels into functioning ones, set reactors to overload, and used their own ships as bombs. Every human vessel that died took at least one Dominion ship with it. Patricia launched Earth's orbital defense platforms. Military satellites that had been disguised as civilian infrastructure. They added their weapons to the battle. Not much firepower, but enough to shift local engagements. Ralseth tried to target them, but human ships kept forcing him to focus on immediate threats. Helen watched the battle from her observation post and saw something the tactical computers missed. The Dominion fleet was contracting, drawing tighter together for mutual support. Human attacks were achieving the opposite of their intention. Instead of dividing the enemy, they were forcing them to unite. She sent an urgent message to David. "They're clustering near the North Ecliptic Pole. If you can force them tighter, I have an idea." David did not question. He redirected all ships to attack from the south. Drive the Dominion fleet in one direction. Compress them into a smaller volume. It cost ships. Human vessels died by dozens to push the Dominion formation exactly where Helen wanted. When the Dominion fleet was concentrated in a sphere barely 1,000 kilometers across, Helen activated her surprise. Earth's particle accelerators. Built for scientific research but repurposed in 72 hours. They generated a focused electromagnetic pulse and fired it at the clustered Dominion fleet. The pulse did not destroy ships. It disabled their communication systems, cut them off from each other. Every vessel was suddenly alone, unable to coordinate, unable to receive orders. Ralseth's fleet became 600 individual ships instead of one unified force. David immediately ordered all human vessels to engage the closest Dominion ships. Without coordination, the Dominion advantage evaporated. One-on-one engagements, chaos and confusion. The exact environment where human adaptability and aggression dominated. The battle raged for 4 more hours. Ships collided and exploded. Escape pods scattered like seeds. The space around Earth became a graveyard of metal and bodies. Patricia watched the casualty counts rise and forced herself not to look away. This was the cost of survival. Remember every number, honor every sacrifice. When the Dominion communication systems finally reset, Ralseth tried to rally his fleet, but he had only 200 ships left. Human forces were down to 90. The battle was even now, and Ralseth realized he could not win. Not here, not against an enemy that refused to accept defeat. He ordered a retreat. But David was not done. He pursued the Dominion remnant, harried them, destroyed stragglers. Patricia sent orders to stop. Let them go. David ignored her. The Dominion needed to understand. They needed to fear humanity enough to never return. The pursuit continued until Ralseth turned his flagship around. He broadcast on all channels. Direct challenge. Single combat. His ship against David's. End this between commanders. David accepted immediately. 2 ships drifted in the darkness between Mars and Earth. Both were damaged. Both had lost crew. Both commanders knew this fight would end with one vessel destroyed and one victorious. Ralseth wanted redemption. David wanted to ensure no Dominion fleet ever threatened humanity again. The Perseverance was barely holding together. Hull breaches on 3 decks, engines running at 40% capacity, weapon systems overheated and cycling slowly. David's crew worked frantically to keep critical systems online. They were exhausted, running on stimulants and desperation. But they refused to quit while their captain still fought. Ralseth's flagship was larger and better armed, but it had taken heavy damage in the retreat. His crew was demoralized. They had watched their armada destroyed by an enemy they were told was weak. Some wanted to surrender, others wanted to flee. Ralseth executed the first officer who suggested withdrawal. The rest remembered their discipline. Patricia tried to call David back. His ship was in no condition for single combat. But David had cut communications with everyone except his own crew. He knew what he was doing. This was not about tactical advantage anymore. This was about making a point that the Dominion would never forget. The 2 ships circled each other slowly. Testing. Probing. David fired a ranging shot that deflected off Ralseth's shields. The Dominion commander responded with a full broadside. Half the weapons malfunctioned, but enough got through to punch holes in the Perseverance's port side. Atmosphere vented from 2 compartments before emergency bulkheads sealed. David adjusted his approach. The Perseverance was more maneuverable despite the damage. Smaller, faster. He used that advantage, spiraled around the Dominion flagship, kept moving, made himself hard to target. Ralseth tried to track him, but his ship's damaged targeting system struggled to lock on. Another exchange of fire. David aimed for weapons batteries and succeeded in destroying one of the flagship's main cannons. Ralseth landed a solid hit on the Perseverance's engine section. Coolant leaked into space as a glittering cloud. David's engineer reported they had maybe 30 minutes before the reactor overheated. Helen watched from Earth and recognized what David was doing. He was not trying to win through superior firepower. He was buying time, drawing out the engagement, making Ralseth focus everything on their duel, while the rest of the human fleet regrouped. She understood the sacrifice David was preparing to make. James Webb stood in an evacuation center surrounded by civilians who had lost everything. He listened to the battle through a military channel and felt responsible for every death. If he had been stronger, if he had prepared for violence instead of hoping for peace, maybe thousands would still be alive. A child looked at him and asked if they were safe now. James lied and said yes. The battle intensified. Both ships were dying slowly, exchanging fire at close range. Ralseth tried to ram, but David evaded at the last second. The near miss tore away the Perseverance's forward sensor array. David was flying half-blind now, using visual tracking and instinct to aim his remaining weapons. His crew reported critical failures across all systems. Life support was failing in the aft sections. Main power was down to emergency backups. They had maybe 6 functional weapons left. The chief engineer recommended abandoning ship. David ordered everyone to the escape pods. They refused. If the captain stayed, they stayed. David felt pride and grief simultaneously. These people were willing to die with him. For him, he wanted to order them to safety, but he also needed them. Needed their skills to keep the ship functional for just a few more minutes. He promised himself that if they survived, he would spend the rest of his life trying to deserve their loyalty. Ralseth's flagship was in similar condition. Fires burned on multiple decks. His crew struggled to contain damage while maintaining combat readiness. His second officer recommended withdrawal. They had proved their courage. Further fighting served no purpose. Ralseth refused. The Dominion did not retreat, did not surrender, did not accept defeat from lesser species. He fired everything, every weapon that still functioned, concentrated all remaining power into one massive barrage. The Perseverance took devastating hits, multiple hull breaches, reactor containment failing, life support gone. David's ship was dead. They were just waiting for the final explosion. David looked at his crew, saw their faces, young and old, veterans and volunteers, all of them knowing what came next. He gave them one last order: evacuate. That's not a request. It's a command. Get to the pods now. This time they obeyed, moved quickly through the dying ship, helped wounded crew members, collected data cores and personal effects. Within 5 minutes, every pod had launched except one. David sat alone in the command chair and watched his crew drift away toward safety. Good. They deserved to survive this. Patricia saw the evacuation and knew what David planned. She opened a direct channel. "Ross, get out of there. You've done enough." "Not yet," David replied. "Ralseth needs to understand, needs to take the lesson back to his people." "What lesson?" "That humanity will burn everything, even themselves, before we let predators win." David disabled the reactor safeties, let the containment fields collapse. The power plant began overheating immediately. He had maybe 3 minutes before it reached critical mass. He aimed the dying Perseverance at Ralseth's flagship and locked the course. Then he fired the last functioning engine. The ship accelerated slowly, but enough. Ralseth saw the human vessel approaching, detected the reactor going critical, understood what was happening. Collision course, suicide attack. He tried to evade, but his ship's engines were too damaged. The Perseverance would hit them in 90 seconds. He ordered all crew to emergency sections, prepared for impact. David watched the distance close. 80 seconds, 70, 60. His ship was shaking apart, metal screaming. The command deck was losing pressure. He strapped into his chair and activated the emergency beacon. If anyone found his ship's black box, they would know what happened here. Why he made this choice. 50 seconds, 40. Patricia was shouting at him through the communications, begging him to eject. David muted her. He did not want her voice to be the last thing he heard. Instead, he pulled up a recording. His grandmother telling stories. Her voice calm and steady, talking about old wars and why peace mattered, why sacrifice mattered. 30 seconds. 20. The Dominion flagship grew larger in his viewport. Ralseth was trying everything to change course. Firing thrusters, dumping mass. Nothing worked. The collision was inevitable. At 15 seconds, David's restraints failed. The command chair tore free from its moorings. He was thrown against the far wall. Bones broke. Vision blurred. Pain exploded through his body. But he was conscious, aware. He saw through the cracked viewport as the Perseverance struck Ralseth's flagship. The impact was surprisingly gentle. More of a scrape than a collision. The Perseverance's nose crumpled against the flagship's hull. Metal merged. Ships locked together. And then the reactor detonated. The explosion vaporized both vessels. A miniature sun bloomed in the space between Mars and Earth. The shockwave destroyed 3 nearby Dominion ships that had stayed to watch, knocked several human vessels off course. The light was visible from Earth's surface, a brief second sun that flared and died. Patricia watched the tactical display as both ship signatures disappeared. She closed her eyes, added David's name to the list of casualties she carried. Good people dying for a peace they never wanted to break. She opened her eyes and gave new orders. Pursue the remaining Dominion ships. Accept surrenders but destroy those who resisted. Helen saw the explosion and felt something break inside. She had known David for only a few weeks, but he represented something important. The idea that warriors could choose peace. That violence could be controlled and directed. Now he was gone. Sacrificed to stop an enemy who refused reason. The remaining Dominion forces scattered. Without Ralseth's leadership, they had no unified command. Some fled toward the outer system. Others surrendered immediately. A few tried to continue fighting and were destroyed quickly. Within 6 hours, the battle for Earth was over. Humanity had won, but the cost was counted in thousands of dead and dozens of destroyed ships. James Webb emerged from the evacuation center when the all-clear sounded. He looked at the sky and saw debris burning up in the atmosphere. Shooting stars made of warships and bodies. He wondered if peace was possible now. If the Dominion would accept defeat. If humanity could return to the quiet life they had built. Patricia knew the answer. Peace was possible. But it would be different now. Earned through strength rather than hoped for through weakness. The galaxy had learned that humanity could fight. Now humanity had to teach them that choosing not to fight was not the same as being unable to fight. 3 days later, searchers found David's body. He had been thrown clear in the explosion, protected by his ejected command chair, somehow alive in a vacuum suit that had deployed automatically, barely breathing, hypothermic, brain damaged from oxygen deprivation, but alive. They rushed him to medical facilities, worked for days to stabilize him. The doctors said he would probably never wake up, that the damage was too severe, but they kept him alive anyway, because humanity needed to know that sacrifice did not always mean death, that even in the darkest moments survival was possible. 6 months after the battle, Earth still counted its dead. Memorial services happened every day, names carved into walls, families mourning losses that diplomacy should have prevented. The orbital debris field was slowly cleared, each piece of wreckage representing someone's sacrifice. Patricia attended as many funerals as she could. She owed them that much. The Dominion had sued for peace within days of Ralseth's death. Their government was in chaos. 3 species trying to process a defeat they never imagined possible. Some wanted revenge. Others wanted understanding. Most just wanted the killing to stop. Humanity offered terms. Simple ones. Withdraw from all occupied systems. Recognize human sovereignty. Establish diplomatic relations. No reparations. No territory seized. Just mutual respect and distance. The Dominion accepted. Not because they wanted to. Because they had no choice. Their military was shattered. Their confidence broken. And the recordings that humanity broadcast had shown their people what humans were capable of. The old wars. The weapons that could end worlds. The history of a species that had learned to stop fighting itself, but remembered every brutal lesson. James Webb led the diplomatic mission to Dominion space. He was different now, harder, less idealistic. He negotiated from a position of strength that he had once considered immoral. The Dominion diplomats treated him with cautious respect. They had learned that humans were dangerous when peaceful and terrifying when provoked. Better to build trust slowly than risk another war. Helen joined the diplomatic mission as cultural advisor. She had survived the war but not unchanged. Watching people die. Watching David sacrifice himself. It altered how she saw the galaxy. The universe was not a peaceful place waiting for friendship. It was full of predators and prey. Humanity had chosen to be neither. They were something else. Something that most species did not understand. She worked with Dominion scientists on cultural exchange programs, sharing knowledge, building connections. It was slow work. Trust did not come easily after so much blood, but Helen believed it was possible. The Dominion could learn, could grow beyond their predator instincts. They just needed time and guidance. Patricia retired from military service. She had done her duty, awakened the sleeping war machines, led them through survival. Now she wanted rest. But the Concordat asked her to stay on as security advisor. Humanity needed someone who understood both peace and war. Someone who could build a military that existed to prevent conflict rather than wage it. She agreed reluctantly, designed a new defense system, small but professional military, well-trained, well-equipped, ready to respond but not eager to fight. Humanity would maintain enough strength to deter aggression. but they would not become the empire they had defeated. Balance was possible, difficult but possible. The awakened veterans faced difficult choices. Return to cryosleep or remain active. Many chose to stay awake. The world needed their skills, but they struggled to adapt to civilian life after being soldiers again. Support groups formed, therapy sessions, communities of people who understood what it meant to be human weapons that tried to be human again. Some veterans could not adjust. The transition from war to peace broke them. Suicide rates were high in the first months. Patricia established counseling programs in veteran services. It helped, not enough, but something. David woke up 4 months after the battle. His first words were questions. Did Earth survive? Did his crew evacuate? Did the war end? The doctors told him yes to everything. He cried, not from pain, from relief. He had accepted death and instead got survival. Guilt and gratitude mixed together in ways he could not separate. His recovery was slow. Brain damage made speech difficult. Memory had gaps. Motor control required relearning. But he was alive, and conscious, and able to understand that his sacrifice had mattered. The Dominion Peace Treaty was signed while he was still in rehabilitation. News channels wanted interviews. He refused them all. What could he say? War was terrible. Peace was better. Everyone knew that already. Patricia visited him regularly, brought updates on fleet reconstruction and diplomatic progress. David listened but rarely spoke. His brain was healing, but the emotional damage was deeper. He had been willing to die, expected to die. Living felt strange, like he was occupying space meant for someone else. Helen visited once, thanked him for buying the time she needed to disable the Dominion communications. David told her he was just doing his job. She said it was more than that. It was choosing to sacrifice for others. He said every soldier did that. She disagreed. Most soldiers were willing to die if necessary. David had chosen to die when it mattered. Different thing entirely. After 6 months, David could walk again, talk clearly, remember most of his life. The doctors cleared him for light duty. Patricia offered him a position in the new Defense Force. Training role, teaching young recruits about tactics and strategy. David declined. He had spent enough time preparing people for war. He wanted to do something else. He became a cargo hauler again, same job as before the war, flying supplies between colonies. It was quiet work, peaceful work. Nobody shot at him. Nobody died. The universe continued, and David was grateful to be a small, unremarkable part of it. Sometimes he had nightmares. The explosion, the collision, the moment he thought was his last. He would wake up gasping and confused, then remember he was safe, alive, the war was over. Those nights were hard, but morning always came. The memorial for the war dead was completed a year after the final battle. A massive structure on Luna visible from Earth. Names inscribed on black stone. 45,000 human casualties. 180,000 Dominion dead. Numbers that represented lives and families and futures that would never happen. Patricia gave a speech at the dedication. She talked about sacrifice and survival, about the difference between peace and helplessness, about maintaining strength while hoping never to use it. The crowd listened quietly. Many were veterans. Others were civilians who lost loved ones. Everyone understood that the memorial was not celebrating victory. It was mourning necessity. James Webb stood in the audience and thought about his failures. He had believed diplomacy could solve everything. That words were stronger than weapons. The war proved him wrong, but it also taught him something. Diplomacy worked when backed by strength. The Dominion respected humanity now because they feared humanity. Maybe peace built on mutual deterrence was better than no peace at all. Helen published her research on Dominion culture. It became required reading for diplomats and military strategists. She explained their hierarchical society, their honor-based warfare, their inability to understand enemies who fought without rules. The thesis was simple. Different species thought differently. Humans had to remember that. Not everyone valued the same things. Understanding that difference prevented conflict. The Concordat reformed its government, created a dual system, Peace Council for diplomacy, Defense Council for security, both equal in authority, both necessary. Humanity would pursue peace but maintain the capability for war. The sleeping war machines would remain ready, just in case. 2 years after the war, David transported supplies to a colony on the edge of human space. During the cargo transfer, a young Dominion merchant approached him, tentative, nervous. The merchant had fought in the war, survived the battle around Earth. He recognized David from the news coverage. They talked briefly. The merchant asked if David hated the Dominion. David said no. Hate was for enemies. The war was over. Now they were just two people trying to make a living. The merchant seemed relieved, said he was glad David survived, that the sacrifice meant something. David thanked him and finished loading his cargo. As David flew away from the station, he thought about the encounter. The galaxy was changing. Former enemies becoming trading partners, fear transforming into cautious respect. Maybe Helen was right. Maybe understanding was possible. It would take generations, but peace could be built, not through ignorance of violence, through memory of it. Patricia died 3 years after the war, old age finally catching up. Her funeral was attended by thousands, veterans and civilians, humans and Dominion. She had spent her final years teaching the next generation, making sure they understood what war cost, what peace required. Her last words were about balance. Stay strong, stay peaceful. Remember both. James Webb continued diplomatic work until his health failed. He successfully negotiated trade agreements with the Dominion, cultural exchanges, scientific cooperation. The relationship was cautious but growing. On his deathbed, he told Helen that he finally understood. Peace was not the absence of capacity for violence. It was the choice not to use that capacity. Humanity had made the right choice, even if the path there was bloody. Helen became humanity's chief ambassador to the Dominion. She spent decades building bridges, teaching young Dominion about human history, showing them that strength and compassion were not opposites. She married a Dominion scientist, had children who represented both species, living symbols of what was possible when former enemies chose understanding. David continued hauling cargo for 20 more years. He never took another military position, never gave speeches about the war. He just flew his routes and did his job. Occasionally reporters found him, asked about the battle, the sacrifice, the explosion. He gave them brief answers. War happened. He survived. He was grateful. On the 30th anniversary of the battle, David visited the memorial, walked along the walls reading names. Some he recognized, most he did not. Each one represented someone who died because peace alone was not enough. He touched the cold stone and remembered, not the glory, not the victory, just the cost. A young couple stood nearby, too young to remember the war. They asked David if he was a veteran. He nodded. They thanked him for his service. He accepted the thanks quietly. What else could he do? They would never understand, would never know what it felt like to choose death, to accept obliteration, to survive anyway. As David left the memorial, he looked at Earth below. Blue and green and beautiful, home, it had survived. Humanity had survived. The peace was holding. Maybe that was enough. Maybe all the sacrifice had purchased something worth keeping. In a hidden facility on a dead moon, the cryopods remained. 300,000 chambers. Empty now, but maintained, ready, just in case. Automated systems kept everything functional. The weapons stayed sealed. The ships stayed dark. The war machine slept. Humanity hoped they would never wake again. But they were not naive anymore. They knew the galaxy, knew that peace required strength, that choices mattered, that sometimes the only way to prevent war was to remember how to wage it. The sleeping war machines rested in darkness. Not forgotten, not abandoned, just waiting, ready to answer if called, because humanity had learned the hardest lesson. Peace was not weakness. Weakness was the inability to choose peace, and humanity would maintain that choice, forever if possible, but never through ignorance of the alternative. The galaxy watched humanity carefully, some with respect, some with fear, most with caution. They had learned what happened when you forced peaceful people to remember violence. The lesson was expensive, paid in blood and fire, but it was learned, and the galaxy was safer for it. Not perfect, not paradise, just safer, and that was enough.